This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/TrekFM. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Postcards from the Edge. I'm your host, Amy Nelson, and joined with me today is Justin Oser. Justin, how are you doing? It's been not so long since I've talked to you, since we co-host together on Earl Grey.
I'm doing great. It's good to see you here as well as on Earl Grey every week. I get my extra Amy for the week.
Exactly. Well, very excited for today's postcard episode, and that is we are going to be discussing the Voyager announcement. So on September 1st, 1994, media outlets around the United States received a 6-page long press release via fax, if you remember that. That announced the casting for Star Trek Voyager, which would debut on the new United Paramount Network, UPN, in January of 1995. And the release touted the Academy Award-nominated actress Genevieve Bujold, and she ended up not starring in Voyager, did she?
No, she didn't. And her attempts to play the character of Janeway have become a little bit infamous.
So it also gave a synopsis of the plot, noting that the show chronicles the adventures of the starship USS Voyager, which finds itself in a distant part of the galaxy, along with former enemy, the Maquis. Together, they must find their way back to Federation space. Now, I will include a link in the show notes, so if you're interested to see an actual copy of the press release that came out back in 1994. So it did premiere in January 16th, 1995, and that was in the middle of Deep Space Nine Season 3. So, Justin, what were your initial thoughts on hearing the announcement of Voyager?
Well, this is where I have to admit that at the time, I wasn't really paying attention to Star Trek, unfortunately. I had seen a little bit of Star Trek before that. I saw The Undiscovered Country in the theaters, but for whatever reason, that didn't stick, and I wasn't quite paying attention to Star Trek at the time. However, I do have some connection to Voyager in its first run. Because I did see season 3 of Voyager while I was in high school. It actually helped me through a really tough time. You know, when I first found out about Voyager, I think I was just flipping through the channels and we happened to have UPN, and I saw this really great, opening sequence that Voyager has. That's one of the things I remember the most. And I like the characters and the situation, and I could kind of relate to being kind of lost out there and trying to find your way somewhere home. So even though I wasn't really paying attention at the time of the announcement, it is something that connected with me, and I felt like there was something really good there.
Yeah, I, of course, was very into Next Generation, as everyone knows. Deep Space Nine, I heard was coming, and I told you my thoughts on that on last week's episode of Postcards. So when Voyager came out, very excited to hear this female captain, Captain Janeway. It didn't bother me too much that it was going to be in the Delta Quadrant so far away. So I think I was just really excited to watch it. And when I did see it, I liked it, but I was just in the middle going to college and life gets so busy, and I never really stuck with it. But my brother, he loves Voyager, and so he was always very excited. And then he would say, "Oh, did you see this episode?" And so I sort of got to see parts of it through the first run. But yeah, I was excited to have it come back to being back on a starship, exploring new territory now. So that was the exciting part that I really liked about Voyager. We've given our thoughts, but the purpose of Postcards is to get your thoughts. And so I asked listeners on the Babel Conference, and they gave us quite a wide range of their first impressions. Now, if you would like to participate in future conversations, just go on over to Facebook and search Babel, that's Babel, into the search field, and you should find us. You can click to join the group, and we'll let you right in. So you can find these posts and comment on them as I put them on and join the conversation. If we want to start, Justin, there were quite a few that were a little negative. So we'll start with the negative and then we will end on a high note with the positives. So Josh Turak says, when I first heard about Voyager, I thought that if the alone in the Delta Quadrant concept was done right, it could have been the best Star Trek of them all. Unfortunately, even though that series did give us some great stories and characters, it never quite clicked the way I had thought and hoped it would. Well, that's a little downer.
Well, I can actually relate to that a bit because I did say that I saw, season 3 while I was in high school. It was in my senior year of high school. I remember liking it, but it didn't give enough of an impression to me to stick so that when I went off to college, I didn't watch it at all. I just forgot about it for many years. And I don't know what it was about that because, of course, since then I've gone back to watching Voyager from the beginning, seen it all. And there's some really excellent episodes in Voyager that are right up there with the best anywhere in Star Trek. But I think sometimes what it suffers from, and I think even the hosts of To the Journey would agree for this, is sometimes it suffers from being, inconsistent or, having episodes of like a really great episode and then one that you're kind of like, eh. So that's the thing for me about Voyager is it can be really inconsistent. But if you kind of go through and watch it all, there's some really amazing stuff in there, and it's well worth it for, all the ones that are just kind of okay to get those that are really amazing. But for whatever reason, when I was watching it in 96, 97, it didn't stick with me enough so that when I went somewhere else, when I went to a different area to college, I just didn't keep up with it.
Yeah, Bill Sweet also says, this was probably the lowest point of Trekdom for me. I was busy with my career and other interests, like we both have said, and the premise, back to another ship after the unusual setting of Deep Space Nine, felt like a step back. I didn't watch the premiere and the episodes didn't grab me enough on first run to gain traction. It didn't help that it seemed to get moved around a lot in the TV schedule. I subsequently watched the whole series, and while there are some great episodes and characters, this remains my least favorite show in the franchise. In retrospect, I think it had greater potential than I realized on first run.
Yep. Well, and I can definitely agree with that. It had more potential. It had more potential not only when I saw it in first run, but, when I went back some years later and was getting more into Star Trek around, in the last 5 or 6 years, I went back and started watching Voyager. And about middle of season 3, I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And I went back to watching TNG or something like that. But then last year when I was making sure I filled in all the gaps, I kind of forced myself, like, I'm going to watch everything no matter what. And when I went through it, I was like, wow, there is some really great stuff, past the point that some of my very favorite episodes I had never seen until a year or two ago. It feels like it had so much potential that it is able to realize in certain episodes. But at least in my opinion, not as consistently as you might see in like The Next Generation or Deep Space Nine. So Dave Veenstra says, I was initially really excited for Voyager. I thought the Lost in Space angle was an interesting twist and that it was going to give them lots of opportunities to really develop a whole crew of characters and not just the top 6 or 7. I was doubly excited when it looked like Voyager was going to be merging with another crew. I was looking forward to a ship that contained some Cardassians or Klingons or Rebels or other non-standard Starfleet races. I was even more excited at the casting of Janeway. All of that excitement was quickly destroyed when the first season came out and we were given some of the least interesting characters in all of Star Trek. It was further crushed when the two crews merged seamlessly almost instantly. It was further crushed when we were given the utterly ridiculous Delta Quadrant aliens like Talaxians and Kazons. I was so disappointed with Voyager that I didn't return to it until after Enterprise was already off the air. So Dave is not a fan of Voyager, I would say. There's actually something in there I wanted to comment on, because one of the criticisms that's leveled against Voyager maybe most often is that they had this concept of Starfleet and Maquis, and that there was going to be this great conflict, and all of a sudden they merged seamlessly. Now, when I was first really going back to Voyager and watching it, that wasn't my impression at all. I felt like there was this potential for conflict, but they got into a situation where they were so far from home that it didn't make sense to keep those animosities. They had to work together to stay alive. And I know that part of what happened was kind of behind the scenes, that the studio didn't want as much conflict going on between the people that are on the ship. But for me, actually, it works fine, and it doesn't bother me in the least. But I've seen lots and lots of people say that bothers them, that it kind of merged seamlessly. But for me, it works. And actually, like when I went back, Dave was talking about season 1. There's quite a few I like in season 1. I think it's actually a fairly strong season, especially as far as first seasons in that era can go. So yeah. Anyway, I just have a little different point of view on it.
Ian Bartholomew says, I didn't really grow up with Star Trek, and it wasn't until I made friends at high school who had done that I began to take an interest. Voyager was the first new show to launch after I began to watch, and I distinctly recall going to a very local convention at a small hotel where a few dozen fans showed up to chat, buy merchandise, and watch some Star Trek. The big draw for this one was that they had put their paws on a copy of Caretaker well in advance of the UK television debut. No doubt a little bit illegal, but the people there weren't worried. Uh-oh, we don't need to know that. But he continues and says, I recall thinking the concept for Voyager was great. I really enjoyed the premiere, but the way they quickly dumped the Maquis storyline, like we were just talking about, was a disappointment. I bought each VHS religiously, consuming the show 2 episodes at a time. But by the start of season 3, I was losing interest little by little. And by season 4, I had stopped watching altogether. I still haven't seen any of season 5, 6, or 7. It seemed to me like the Delta Quadrant story was just a gimmick in the end. The stakes and peril were never as high as they had been made out initially. And Deep Space Nine's phenomenal closing years greatly overshadowed Voyager and exposed it a little, I think. Well, definitely. That's, I guess, one of the risks that you take when you're having shows go concurrently. And here, Deep Space Nine, and we know so many people love Deep Space Nine, and the stories were getting so good that maybe Voyager was overshadowed a bit.
Yeah, and actually, like when I was first attempting to watch everything in Voyager, I had already seen Deep Space Nine, and it was my favorite by that point. And so I was watching Voyager, and I was thinking, by the middle of season 3, when I was rewatching it, like I'd rather be rewatching Deep Space Nine. So I kind of went back to that. So I can understand, especially at the time when the two were going on at the same time for most of their runs, that could happen. Well, Ian, I hope that you do revisit some of seasons 5, 6, and 7. It actually has some of my favorite episodes of Voyager in there. But yeah, it's interesting because I think you see that perspective quite a bit on Voyager, that because people feel it's kind of a little inconsistent, they just give up at a certain point, which I think is unfortunate. So we have a comment from Clara Jean Cook. She says, as a young girl, I was excited to see a female captain, and I immediately admired Janeway. I think that you see that comment quite a bit, that people watching the show really were excited to see a female captain, inspired by it. I've seen a lot of stories where young girls were growing up in the 90s were inspired to leadership roles and to be scientists by Janeway and Voyager, which I think is great. I mean, I think it's really important what they did, having the first female lead and an important female captain in the show.
Agreed. Shoaib Mirza says, along that same vein, I clearly remember watching Caretaker in 1995 with my family. As a 7-year-old, this was the first Star Trek show I viewed in first run through. My excitement was for more Star Trek. The ship and the characters seem interesting enough. I admit my understanding of the plots was largely superficial in those first couple of seasons. However, they were so formative for me as a young viewer, like we were talking. She continues and says, having a female captain seemed perfectly normal to me. I didn't recognize its significance until my adulthood, and more so after listening to Trek FM. Also watching interviews with Kate Mulgrew on YouTube, I respect her so much for enduring the asinine games surrounded her hairstyles and over-critiquing her performance, fearing she's too feminine. What does that mean? My favorite characters during original airing are Tuvok, B'Elanna, and Tom. I look forward to Discovery's characters the most. There being a female lead doesn't diminish or heighten my excitement. After all, it's 2017. Also, television production and storytelling is in its golden age, and I am pumped to see where Trek will venture to take advantage of modern film tech. Definitely, we get to see those characters, and like you were saying, very influential. And I think, you know, as you see that on television and recognize that, and then now, 2017, it's like, well, it shouldn't be a big deal.
And I think one of the interesting things is, you know, I've read so much about Janeway's hairstyle was such a big deal, and they kept changing it and changing it and changing it. And it seems kind of ridiculous now. And I don't think there would be a controversy now about, like, how should we do Sonequa Martin Green's hair for Discovery? I mean, I think in that way things have changed now that we have another series coming with a female lead. But it was such a new thing, and they were really worried so much about the perception of Janeway and Kate Mulgrew as Janeway.
Yeah, Stephen Dryly Collins says, talking about Janeway, I remember the significance of a female captain going over my head and being more excited that the captain was also the science officer, and being excited by that fact, and the realization that being science-minded and being suited to leadership weren't mutually exclusive. I love that. I mean, Janeway brings so much to the character of Captain. And you see that throughout the series. I appreciate that.
Oh, yes. I mean, such a strong character, and also definitely great that her background is science. I've always loved that.
So do you have another one you'd like to read?
I do. Jason Moe says, I loved Voyager, and my most vivid early memory is of being absolutely blown away by the opening credits. As much as I love DS9, favorite show, I have to admit that the opening credits of Voyager were a refreshing change, with the incredible score and beautiful shots of Voyager exploring, especially that shot with the camera rising through a planetary ring and then seeing the ship reflected in the ring. Amazing. The credits and opening music did a great job setting the mood for this adventurous new show.
That has got to be one of my favorite comments. I mean, when I was reading, and I'm sure listeners, as he's explaining it, can you just not see the credits and hear the music? It was so good. It might be my favorite, even above Next Gen. We won't talk about that. But Voyager, I mean, yes, the music is so beautiful. And the way that they did the opening scenes and credits was amazing. I love Jason. Thank you so much for bringing that up.
And I'm glad that he brought that up, too, because the opening credits and the music are so amazing that now when I see the opening credits to Voyager, I get this nostalgic feel back to that time when I was watching it in the mid-90s and what it meant to me and all of the potential and all of that. I feel it every time. Like out of any Star Trek series, you know, that was really the only one so far up until Discovery that I saw any of in first run. And it's the one that's special in that way to me, that can take me back to those moments when I enjoyed it so much and it meant so much to me.
Yes. So another positive comment, Joey Slawinski. This was my first Star Trek premiere. I was too young to stay up for it, so my father recorded the pilot for me and watched it the next day. Again, getting that family, you know, we hear that throughout all of Trek. So I rewatched that tape so many times, I even had the commercials memorized. I love then and love now everything about it. Being so young, I didn't know any of the background drama. All I knew is that I was getting new adventures in a world that I was already in love with. Voyager is still my favorite to this day.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, these shows can mean so much to people. I mean, it can just mean the world to them, and I love to see that and to have heard it and seen these comments for the different shows. Patrick Devlin says, I like the idea when announced, but have to say season 1 did grab me. I fell off from Star Trek for a few years, but came back in season 6 and loved it. Eventually went back and watched it all and wished I had never stepped away.
Definitely some good stories there. And yeah, when, life does happen but when you come back and you're like, oh, why did I stop? It's so good. I have that happen a lot, unfortunately. Another one that I wanted to read was submitted by Davey Elmer. And he says, Voyager is an interesting series for me because while I remember watching and enjoying episodes on UPN late at night and liking the characters, my appreciation for the series has evolved over the years. And I've come to appreciate it for what it was instead of lamenting for what it didn't do, to the point that it is now firmly my second favorite Trek series, behind Deep Space Nine, of course, and along with that series, a measuring stick by which I'll be judging Discovery. So we're seeing that Discovery is definitely going to have to compare to some of the previous series.
Well, I think it's natural for that to happen. I mean, whatever your favorite is, like your favorite is Next Generation, Amy, it's going to be what you measure it by. Like, is it as good as Next Generation, or how I feel about that? I think it's natural to do that. And I really hope that, for whatever series is your favorite, that Discovery is worthy of everything that you love about those different series. James Smith says, I was pumped for the new series. The more Star Trek, the better. I couldn't get enough. The original series, The Next Generation, the animated series, and Deep Space Nine were all good TV, and I knew Voyager would be no exception. Back then, Star Trek was an event. The world would stop for me, and nothing else would matter while it was on.
James, you summed it up. And when I feel the same way, when life gets so hectic and we just need time to stop, enjoy some Star Trek, and just let everything go, take a little step back, and then life seems to be a little bit more bearable.
We hope that Discovery does the same, that everyone's excited for it, and that it'll mean just as much.
Yes, very much. Well, Christopher Query says, I thought it was clever to have Voyager stuck in the Delta Quadrant. That way, stories would not interfere with Deep Space Nine or vice versa. Yeah, that's a really good point. As much as I like Deep Space Nine, it was an issue that we rarely saw the Enterprise, not even during large battles. So that was a criticism for Deep Space Nine. I agree with others who wrote about the two crews easily merging, and we talked about that. Tuvok was almost emotional at the thought of Neelix in a Starfleet uniform, but no one seemed to have a problem when the Maquis donned them. Speaking of Tuvok, a Vulcan back on Trek. I'm not sure where I rank Janeway among the other captains if I had to. I put Sisko on top because of the family and religious issues. I like Picard, but he kept his distance from the crew. Of course, Kirk was the one who could almost always turn death into a fighting chance to live. Janeway usually kept her principles, but also did what needed to be done when it came to getting the crew home. And yeah, so Janeway, would you rank her? Where would you put her?
Well, this is a really tough question because these are different characters that express themselves in this leadership role in different ways. But, if I'm to rank them, really, loving all the different captains, Picard and Sisko are probably, I always tell people they're kind of tied for me because they're different. They're good in different ways. Picard tends to be good in, more of a diplomatic situation or understanding things. Sisko more in a combat situation or something hostile. I really admire Janeway quite a lot for everything she has to go through and being strong for her crew and helping them through all of these terrible circumstances. So she's definitely up there for me, and I appreciate Kirk and Archer a lot. I mean, I love them all for different things, but you have to admire, like, in some ways, Janeway's thrown into the worst situation with the least help, and, it helps to everyone to make their way through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. The support of the Federation, all the other captains have. Well, I guess not Archer, since there was no Federation at the time.
But he's not that far away from Earth.
Exactly. He didn't. Yeah. So Janeway, she definitely is out there on her own, and kudos to her for making it work. And again, doing what she has to do to get Voyager back home. So I would definitely put her high up too. I won't rank them, but she's high up there for me as well.
Definitely. I mean, Kate Mulgrew does such an amazing job with Janeway, and, she plays the character in a different way than you've seen for other Starfleet captains or leads for Star Trek shows, but in a way that feels, really true to the spirit of Star Trek. And I really like that. Well,
Justin, those are the comments. Some of the comments, there are more. So if you would like to go and read through them, it's very interesting to see what the fans have to say about Voyager. So you've seen Voyager. What are your overall thoughts? Was it a true Star Trek to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think Voyager, I mean, it's hard to say like what is or isn't Star Trek, but I think it definitely is true to the spirit of Star Trek. And I think there's a lot of it that I find really inspirational. People dealing with difficult times, impossible odds, and they're going to try to do it the best way that they can. And even without, having a lot of the support that you see in other shows, they're going to try to stick as much as they can to their principles. Sometimes it gets a little bent, but they're trying their best to kind of keep this line of what they've learned from being in the Federation. And, I consider it as much a part of Star Trek as anything else. And as I said before, even though I think it has some issues and some inconsistencies, there are, episodes of Voyager that I would argue are as good as anything else in the whole Star Trek franchise. And there are definitely, at least a few episodes that are right up there in my top 5 or 10 from Voyager. I when they're at the top of their game, I just love it. And it's just up there with the best of anything in Star Trek.
Yeah, well, my final thoughts on Voyager. I think that Voyager tried to do the best that it could, and I really appreciate it for that. For example, with TNG, it was episodic TV. That was the nature of television back in the day. And then we get Deep Space Nine, and it was had the arcs, more serialized. And I think Voyager came in because I think some fans, and I was one of them, it was like, oh, why are we having these huge long stories? Just give me an episode. I want it to be self-contained. And I think Voyager did great mixing those two worlds of, okay, they're far away in the Delta Quadrant. So your overall arch is that they're trying to get back home. And then along the way, you have these standalone episodic episodes. Well, you know what I mean. So I appreciate Voyager because for me, I like episodic TV, and I hope that we do get standalone episodes in Discovery. I may be in the minority there, but I like episodic TV. Sometimes I don't have the time to consistently be watching one episode after another to try and get the entire story. I like getting the story in one sitting. So I hope Discovery does that. But I think Voyager did a great job getting that long arc and getting that episodic TV. So I appreciate Voyager for that. I think it does also a great job of still continuing to bring the science and the science fiction and the new disasters and things that are happening with the ship and how are they going to do it, along with the definite character development that you get, like you said, with merging and coming together and working together for this sole purpose to get back home, picking up a few passengers along the way. We get 7 of 9 and we lose Tess and stuff like that. So I do enjoy Voyager a lot, and I'm grateful to have that here and that we get to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. It's been great talking about it.
Well, it's been fun talking about Voyager series announcement, but it isn't the only thing we've been discussing here on the network. So take a listen to some of the other things you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Literary Treks.
Oh, Matthew, I'm doing just fine. You know, it's always fun every week to hop on here and talk Star Trek books and comics with you. And I don't know if you realize this, Matthew, but this is our 200th episode of Literary Wait a minute, Matthew. We don't host this show anymore.
The 602 Club.
I honestly was thrilled with the way that they set it up because, like you said, sort of like Russian dolls, I guess, is a good way to explain it. You introduce one character in this existing show, and then it leads to that character's own show, which leads to the next one's own show.
The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
There were a lot of comments talking about this roller coaster ride. Mm-hmm. You know, yay, I'm so excited Trek's on. Oh, it's a prequel. You know, I saw the first trailer and I loved it. Oh, Brian Fuller's no longer working on it. Mm-hmm. Oh, we're getting all this diversity. Oh, look at the Klingons, right? And you could just see it. Seriously, some fans have gone through some serious roller coaster rides.
To the journey!
And so I could see the Hirogen viewing themselves as very noble, very civilized. They don't let their prey suffer, but really they're doing these horrific things, just like we do here in the real world when we have to go fight wars.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they go home and they write an epic poem about it, and that makes it okay.
the Hirogen equivalent of Beowulf.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all of these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and written review. That helps other listeners find our show. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps. And you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. Of course, it's the Postcard Show. There are many ways for you to do that. The best place is to join the larger conversation in the Babel Conference, like I mentioned before. And if you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select The Edge. That will come straight to me. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. So, Justin, where can people find you on the interwebs?
Well, you can find me co-hosting Earl Grey, our TNG podcast on Trek FM with you, Amy, and also with Richard Marquez. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at TrekFan4747, where I tweet about nothing but Star Trek. And I'm currently tweeting out my Season 3 TNG rewatch. And you can also find me hanging around the Babel Conference on Facebook.
Yes, you guys, if you do not follow Justin on Twitter, you're missing out. He is posting and commenting galore. I love getting on Twitter just to see what he has to say. And it's like I'm living vicariously through him as he's posting his TNG rewatch. I'm like, oh, yes, I love that episode. Everyone I love. Well, you know that. If you listen to Earl Grey, which is where you can find me co-hosting with Justin and Richard, you can also find me on Twitter. Not as prolific as Justin, but I am there at Miss Amy Nelson. And my favorite place is hanging out in the Babel Conference, reading and commenting on all of your thoughts as well. If you'd like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce and distribute these shows each month. We really appreciate any support you can give us and hope you'll join the team. Again, you can find the details at patreon.com/TrekFM. We'd like to take this time and recognize our associate producers of The Edge, Norman Lau, Tony Robinson, Thomas Puleo, Lisa Slack, and Shoaib Mirza. Thank you so much for supporting The Edge. Well, Justin, thank you again so much for coming on Postcards to the Edge.
Oh, thanks so much. It was great to be here, and hopefully somewhere in the future I can be back.
Yes, I'm thinking there might be another time. So join us next week for another episode of Postcards from the Edge. Hailing frequencies open.